appearance of this book has really been a great mystery for me. So I did not intend to write a book when I started out. Uh, Nearing the end of my life, I've been reviewing uh, patterns of this life to get deeper into the question of who I am. And I realized that throughout my life, there had been a series of events that I could not rationally explain from my scientific understanding. So I decided just for myself to begin to make a list of these. And I realized as this list expanded and expanded just through association, that there's a long pattern of this in my life, going back to my childhood. And it had the almost the sense of a breadcrumb trail leading me deeper into this question. As a young boy, it always seemed to me that there must be something more to reality than what I was seeing, that there had to be something behind it. And that led me eventually into science and then into psychology. And what I've discovered over the last several decades, particularly with my exposure to Jung and then to G.I. Gurdjieff, is that the confusion has come from the conflict between science and spirituality, and the kind of concretized secular uh, science that contemporary society favors could not address these questions of mystery. But the arena of spirituality could. But spirituality has been dogged and hogtied really for centuries by religion, which is a formal set of beliefs and principles that are not to be challenged. One of the appeals of Gurdjieff's method, a huge appeal, was his initial admonition to not believe anything that one could not confirm for oneself through one's own experience, regardless of the source. And then he provides methods for getting there. But my own experience with this over this multi-decade exploration of who and what I really am and what is going on in the universe, what's the purpose of life, what lies behind this, is that I've come to the recognition for myself, I'm not by any means the first, that science and spirituality are not in conflict or shouldn't be, but they're actually complementary. They're two sides of the same coin, where science uses its instruments to look outside into the expanding universe and down into the microscopic world of cells, molecules, subatomic particles. What is inventing these instruments and looking is the mind. And yet the mind is not included in any of these scientific theories. And it then came to me that the solution to human problems lie inside each individual, not in organizations and laws, which are only reflections of the individual's attempt to gain more mastery and control over their manifestations. So it's now come to me that the central mystery of existence is consciousness itself. For me, consciousness is the missing link between the macro and the microscopic worlds. Therefore, mystery of how we know anything, that there's anything, you can know anything, that we're even having this conversation. We are the mystery and the question of the deepest mystery. And that in order to understand these questions that linger in the realm of philosophy, what is the purpose of all this? We have to go inside ourselves, because it's inside where the questions arise. It's inside where the ideas for the experiments arise. It's inside where the meaning is interpreted and derived. So we are the instrument of inner exploration. And the exploration tool is attention, special kind of attention. which Gurdjieff gives a lot of attention to, and which is explored in this book. So I think, in a way, I wound up writing it for people who I imagine are similar to myself, who have an affinity for the feel and taste of mystery, in the sense that somehow uh, mystery is critical. It is the doorway to what we don't know and don't understand. And if we are to penetrate deeper and deeper into the meaning of existence, we must include ourselves, our own psychology, our own awareness, the degree of sensitivity and varying degrees of consciousness, apparently, in all living things, as well as the material bodies that form in the universe under the natural laws. So I think I wrote the book, or decided to make it into a book, to share with other people who might have an affinity for this particular approach, what I've discovered and how I've gone about it. So it's an offering of what I've come to at this late stage in my life.
Would you describe it as a book about psychology or a book about the Gurdjieff work?
Both. Trans- the kind of transformation that is pointed to as a possibility by the great religious traditions, by spirituality, are of a psychological nature. They have to do with the development of our understanding, of our perception, of our capacity to understand ourselves and accept, forgive and accept, but recognize and deal with our weaknesses so that we may become more compassionate towards others. What has been discovered about human beings that has some lip service in the general culture, but is not really believed or ascribed to, is that for the most part, we are biological machines. Our bodies organize themselves according to the laws of nature. And we are born into these bodies. We begin to wake up into these bodies and are taught by our culture, surroundings, our parents, our educators, directly, indirectly, how to think about ourselves, who we are supposed to be, what the world is, what it means. And we have lots of experiences. And those experiences will form in us patterns of attraction and repulsion, defense, or going towards something, trying to get it. And so by the time we're adults, we're pretty much programmed, just like computers, by all these preferences and reactions. We think we're making choices. We think we're responding to people from our own genuine self. But to a very large degree, we are responding nearly all the time from conditioned psychological, physiological reflexes, very similar to Pavlov's dogs. So to understand ourselves, to try and free ourselves as much as possible from this conditioning, requires getting behind the conditioning. That requires a special kind of trained attention that can learn the inner map of the architecture of our psychology, how to study it, so that we can increasingly meet situations with at least a choice between the conditioned response or maybe something that seems more appropriate to the situation when seen from a higher perspective. This all happens in the mind, it all happens in the feelings. So it's all psychology. But whereas traditional contemporary psychology and psychotherapy are oriented towards healing the personality from dysfunctional conditioned reactions so that it can fit into and be more comfortable in the life around it. Spiritual psychology, transformational psychology seeks to go much deeper beyond that. into the realm of what our possibilities might be if our awareness could operate uh, relatively free from all of our conditioning. So the work is psychology, but it's not ordinary psychology. Now, to get to it, one's ordinary psychology has to be relatively stable, not subject to enormous constant mood swings or neuroses that would distract one from the even the capacity to begin to learn to train the attention to be more quiet. So sometimes, in order to enter the world of the depth psychology, one might need a period of time in ordinary psychology, learning how to get the personality to quiet down enough to be able to study what lies behind it.
So, did your knowledge of the work, was it a big help in your role as a professional psychologist?
Incalculable help for a number of reasons. Of course, all psychotherapies have a model of the psyche, a personality, of what disturbs it and what to do about it. So Jung and Gurdjieff providing models are no different in that sense. But for me, the models had great more depth because they both penetrate beneath the ordinary level of everyday psychological uh, difficulties. So my own practice allowed me to be able, for hours a day, or months after months, year after year, be able to sit with one or more people and to be able to practice dividing my attention so that I was not only focused as acutely as possible on what they were saying, their words, their tone, their nuance, their body gestures, but also inside myself on the kind of mental images and associations that would arise in response to them, to the kind of emotional reactions that would arise in me in response to them, to the way my body responded, so that I could see the interaction between us. Then I would have to separate what I saw inside myself from my own historical patterning to be able to discern what might be relevant or helpful as a resonant response to what my client was manifesting versus what was only of my own material coming up by association. So it offered tremendous growth potential to myself. And I was also able to approach psychotherapy as a teaching, so that one of my aims, when at all possible, was to teach my clients how to, as best they could, separate themselves as observer from the kinds of patterns that were bothering them. Now, this these kinds of techniques have now become quite commonplace in contemporary psychology, which is why it's increasingly successful in helping people with behavioral adjustments and mood disorders and regulation. Uh, but it doesn't necessarily help them identify or move towards the mystery behind all of this, which I think is due probably to two reasons. Most people are not interested. They just want to be more comfortable in life, which is fine. And in that sense, psychotherapy has been enormously beneficial. But also, you can't take someone where you yourself have not been. So if the psychotherapist himself, herself, has not visited these deeper realms and has some understanding of their extreme relevance and how to reach them, they're not going to be able to bring that into their therapy. So, in that sense, being a psychotherapist has been a great benefit for me. And I hope that kind of quality that I've just described was also of benefit to my clients.
So let's talk about self-observation. How would you, from your knowledge and your experience, how would you describe the act of self-observation?
we're all familiar with the taste of this in an ordinary way when we talk about being self-conscious. I was worried I didn't look good. What would they think of me? Did I have spinach sticking up between my teeth? My performance could have been better. This kind of neuroticized concerns about or imaginings about what others think about me in regard to supporting my image of myself, which is critical, or propping me up. Uh, this is not helpful for the most part. However, look at the mystery. Our we know what's going on in the world. We receive impressions from the world because we have a variety of sensory systems that pick up different energetic wavelengths from the outside. So light becomes vision, and molecules in the air become smell, and air pressure becomes sound. Where are the internal sense organs that allow me to hear my thoughts, to see my dreams, to feel uh, bittersweet or awe or reverence. What is inside that can see any of this? So the question, what is self-observation, really has to then extend into the question of, well, what is the self that is observing? And how is this observation even being made? But this is what science has not been able to approach, which is why it's been in the realm of philosophy, spirituality, and religion. Neurologists today, with our new instruments, are making incredible progress on mapping areas of the brain, and based on electrical activity in the neurons in conjunction with whatever kind of manifestation is being requested, uh, is building a very useful geographic map of the brain's architecture so that we know the areas where certain kinds of impressions and experiences can occur, because we assume that the electrical activity there is correlated with it. But how that happens and who is inside watching it, much less perhaps trying to not be a passive observer of where the attention is, but actually grab hold of the attention and move it to something that it wants to study. Here's the mystery I was alluding to later, or earlier rather. This is the great mystery. What is here that can know anything? So my experience is that there are levels of the capacity to observe, moving from the totally subjective self-consciousness that I described earlier to very high levels of impartial seeing of oneself as another person, being able to observe the movements of the body, monitor the fluctuation of the feelings, see the connection with the coming and goings of thought, and watch one's body and personality in its natural habitat in its life, as if you were watching a 3D movie. So that's a huge difference in scale between spinach between my teeth, but that capacity is there, and that's the mystery that has interested me most of my life, and which has explored in this book, and certainly was the focus for Carl Jung and G.I. Gurdjieff, as well as countless philosophers, mystics, and real scientists throughout the ages.